Hello, this is Miss Wills again, and today we will be continuing a look at the essay question on Mr. Birling. So last lesson you planned it, this lesson you're going to be looking at how to structure a response and write a paragraph and write a response to the question. So as always, the green text boxes are tasks you must complete and the red are challenge tasks. Now, the aims of this lesson are for you to practice structuring a response to the question, how does Priestley present Mr. Birling in an inspector calls? What I'd like you to start with is just recapping the assessment objectives. So last lesson we looked at exactly what an examiner is looking for when they're marking your work. What I'd like you to do for me is just to summarise for each assessment objective what the examiner will be looking for in your work. So can you just pause this clip for me and give that a go? Okay, what I'm going to be putting up on the screen now are the answers. So if you just check what you've got down against these, please, and make any changes if you need to. So it is important to take into account what the examiner is looking for, obviously, when you're writing your response. And you will see when we talk about PEE paragraphs, point, evidence, explain, it's kind of following that format, whereas AO1, you need to make your point and you need your evidence. But the explanation part of that paragraph, it encompasses quite a lot. So you've got to take into account all of these things when you are writing your response. So that explain section of your response should take up most of your paragraph. And we're going to have a little look at what a paragraph would look like in a moment and how to structure it. But before we do that, I just want you to look back at your grid that you planned last lesson. And this was in response to the question, how does Priestley present Mr. Birling in an inspector calls? Now, you have took your time for each paragraph here to look at a specific moment in the text and analyse what that tells us about Mr. Birling. What I'd like you to do for a moment before we get into writing about these paragraphs is to just zoom out a little bit there. So you've zoomed in on specific moments. I want you now to consider the bigger picture about Mr. Birling, about the journey he has gone on. And in your notes, I would like you to consider the points you've made, and I'd like you to describe the journey Mr. Birling has gone on and write down, whether or not he's changed at all and why you think this is the case. So I'd like you to pause this clip and to write your ideas for that down, please. Okay, hopefully you've managed to get that done, guys. What we're going to focus on now is we're going to focus on, well, what does an actual paragraph look like? How do we structure this? Now, it would be beneficial for you to get these ideas down, either write them down or take a picture and print it out, whatever suits you best. But these are kind of the stages and how you would structure a response to an inspector calls. So obviously first you need to write the point you're trying to make, and the point does need to, answer the question as well. You need to quote and provide context to where it has come from. So in other words, don't just drop your quotation in after you've made your point. You need to introduce your quote. You need to tell the examiner, which point in the play has this come from, which conversation has this come from, a conversation between who. Then add your statement about what your quotation suggests. Always try to add an alternative as well. So in other words, try to add a couple of statements about what this tells us. So in one breath it tells us this, but it also tells us this about this character. And last lesson, when we went through an example, I told you try and get down at least 2 statements about the quote, about what it tells us. Discuss the words you've highlighted and what they demonstrate. So this is zooming in on language choices, also identifying and labeling correct terminology and whether any dramatic devices have been used as well. And then finally discuss your social, historical context and Priestley's purpose. So these are all kind of things you need to make sure is kind of the ingredients of your paragraph. So we're going to have a look at how this looks with an example of a paragraph that has been written. So step 1, write the point you're trying to make. So here we have a lovely clear point. At the end of the play, Priestley presents Mr. Birling as a man who has not learned his lesson, unlike his children Eric and Sheila, who have clearly seen the error of their ways. That's a nice, clear point. So of course what we need next is our quotation. But not just our quotation, we need to provide some context as to where it's come from, this quotation. We need to introduce it. So we have here, when Sheila and Eric voice their concerns that their father has not changed, Berlin replies, now look at the pair of them, the famous younger generation who know it all. So there we have a bit of introduction to the quotation. We know where it's come from, and that's what I'd expect you to do as well. Then we have add your statement about what your quotation suggests. So here we have a couple of statements. This suggests Mr. Birling is mocking his children for thinking they know best. This in itself highlights Birling's arrogance. He does not believe someone younger than him could know better. There's 2 or 3 statements there about what this quote suggests, what this tells us about Mr. Birling. So next, of course, we need to zoom into the quote and we need to discuss the key words and the significance of them and what this does tell us about his character. So the verb and imperative look tells the audience that Berlin is still a commanding presence in this house. He has not been humbled by the events that have taken place over the last 2 hours. Priestley has Berlin used the pronoun them to describe his children, perhaps to highlight the divide between the older and younger generations. There we have a kind of link and tie in with key themes and ideas there. Them is very dismissive, and an audience may feel animosity towards Berlin, that he is segregating himself away from his children. So there we have analysis of language, but also tying that in with the impact of that language on the audience. Even the adjective famous shows how mocking and cold Berlin is here. So that is quite in-depth analysis there, which not only kind of conveys what these words, what these terms, and the kind of techniques used, what they convey about his character, but also the impact on the audience, and also key ideas and themes it ties in with as well. So a lot of boxes have been ticked within that section there. Step 5, discuss your social, historical context and Priestley's purpose. So this is kind of the last stage here. So here we have Priestley may show Berlin is unwilling to change in order to target the younger generation. So here we have what Priestley's trying to do through his character, which of course he has created. It is them that can change, and if they do, they are the ones who will grow up with Priestley's preferred socialist views, therefore changing a capitalist society into one that embraces socialism. Berlin is a representation of business owners at the time. Here we have our social historical context. For example, there was no minimum wage at this time, and business owners could pay their workers what they wanted. Berlin pays his workers low wages to make more money for himself. So there we go. We have everything in that paragraph. We have our key point, we have our clear point, our evidence which has been introduced. We have zooming in on language and analysis here, but also discussing, labeling the key terms as verb, imperative, etc. And then we have social historical context and purpose as well. So we kind of have everything we need in that paragraph. And that is just analysing one quotation there. We get all of this. So our P part of the paragraph ends here. The explanation is a huge chunk of this paragraph, okay? And that's kind of what your paragraphs need to look like as well. So there we go. So that's it broken down there. Now it's over to you guys. I would like you to choose one paragraph from that grid, preferably not the last paragraph, because obviously that's one we've just looked at there. And I would like you to write a response using that structure and using those steps. Now, it will be quite challenging this at first, but do just give it a go. And of course, if you are struggling, do always ask for help from your teacher. So thank you very much for listening, everyone. Please make sure you give that a go. And as I say, if you do have any questions, please email your teacher. Thank you.